It seems like it's almost business as usual for the Kansas City Chiefs, who are off to a 3-0 start. This is a team that the majority of people picked to win the Super Bowl coming into this year as they try and pull off this three-peat. And, I mean, they've been tested in 3 different games up to this point, coming down to the very end. Some crucial referee calls, which obviously, especially when you're talking about the Chiefs, sort of bake into that conversation. But either way, they pulled out all 3 games up to this point, and even if it hasn't been perfect for them, they are, again, getting the job done, which is really all at this point Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid could really be asking for. Now, we'll start off with Mahomes here because I do think it's starting to be a real conversation as to the offense overall is still getting results for them. They score 22 points in this win against the Falcons. They are already up from their points per game total from last season. Again, just 3-game sample size, but 27 against the Ravens, 26 against the Bengals, 22 against the Falcons. All things considered, that is fine results in terms of scoring output, but Patrick Mahomes still hasn't really looked like himself up to this point. He has 4 interceptions through 3 weeks, a couple of those being, I specifically look at the one from the Baltimore game and the first one in the Cincinnati game, that they were definitely just bad interceptions. Last night, not a great one either. And we are just seeing sort of a lack of explosiveness still from this passing game. And that's even with Rashee Rice, who has emerged, I think, confidently. We've been talking about it these past couple weeks. I think that at this point, you have to consider Rashee Rice a legitimate wide receiver 1 option. Last night, he was incredible once again. 12 receptions for 110 yards and a touchdown. Him and Patrick Mahomes just seem to be on the same wavelength. It's sort of a combination of, and I talked about this before, that Rice has almost taken over that Travis Kelce role, where at times it's just get in the middle of the field in those intermediate routes and just continue to make plays after the catch, with which Rice is doing so. But we're also seeing him on the perimeter. That touchdown pass that he had in week 2 against the Bengals, just running down the sideline, Patrick Mahomes hitting him perfectly in stride. There seems to be a real connection there, and we saw Rice down the second half of the season last year for the Chiefs really start to take on this role, and it has just continued into this season, which is a huge plus there. That being said, though, still sort of a lack of depth right now, and the Chiefs definitely feel better positioned that as the year goes on, they can add to that, as opposed to last year where you just never knew if there really was all that much upside for some of those other targets. You have a Xavier Worthy who was very quiet in this game, just 2 catches for 17 yards. He had the mistake in that fourth quarter that sort of let the Falcons remain in the game. That it was the 3rd and short play where Mahomes was looking to Rice, and Rice just stopped running on that play. Announcers touched on it a little bit. Kind of seemed like Rice just had the mentality, I'm going to find open space and I'm going to sit there. Got to finish through the route there, but, those are sort of rookie mistakes, and Worthy hasn't necessarily emerged as a downfield target yet, which is something that I do feel like the Chiefs are going to continue to work on behind the scenes with them, while also trying to make sure that he gets his touches. He gets 3 carries in this game. If you're a fantasy football owner for Xavier Worthy, for example, I mean, he is going to get opportunities, but he's still just not all that ultra refined as a wide receiver yet up to this point. And outside of that, really the big conversation here is that Travis Kelce has been, for the most part, a non-factor this season. Now, this was his best game yet, 4 catches for 30 yards, but that's obviously not the Travis Kelce we have come to know over the past handful of years, and I've been pretty adamant up to this point that it doesn't surprise me that Kelce is getting less of a workload at this point. He's now 34 years old at this point, 34 years old, turning 35 in a couple weeks at the beginning of October. But at this point, he sort of understands that it's about more so picking his spots, that he is a tight end on the older side that isn't quite, an extremely durable position throughout history and as you age. So I'm not surprised to see less of a workload there, but just quite to the level of an ineffectiveness of passing to Kelce at this point, I think does sort of garner some red flags. Now, I sort of, we were all sort of, at least to some degree, noticing this during the regular season last year, and then he ends up taking it to that next level with over 300 yards and a few touchdowns in the Super Bowl run. So I'm not going to fully declare him washed yet, but his value, especially given the fact that he is really just not anything of a blocker at this point. His effort, he can put himself in positions. There was specifically a screenplay right out of the gates in the second half where you just see he does not have the same drive as those other tight ends, like the top echelon ones, like a Mark Andrews or a George Kittle, to actually finish through on these blocks. And blocking is something that goes under the radar for a lot of NFL fans. But, at a tight end position like Kelce, I do think it's worth bringing up because it sort of separates the fact that he is not being a receiver like he typically is, that he's not bringing a whole lot of value because he doesn't really care for blocking like that right now. And again, I excuse him because of the fact that he is sort of probably trying to preserve himself a little bit for the playoffs, but it's definitely a very strange phenomenon that's going on because Rice has 110 yards, Kelce has 30, and nobody else on the team is really all that big of a threat from a receiver standpoint. Now, Juju Smith-Schuster did have a touchdown last night. Maybe that's something. I think that play went down right after it was an injury to one of those other wide receivers, and it does go to show that Juju as a fourth wide receiver, I'm not huge on him as a Patriots fan myself. I saw what happens when you sort of throw him into being a main part of the game plan. That being said, though, he is a good depth wide receiver there for Kansas City, and he's familiar with the system because he was with them during their Super Bowl run in the 2022-23 season. So all things considered, it's not hopeless there. I think that Worthy and Juju and Kelce are all people that you could maybe envision having a little bit of a bigger role as the season goes on, but still something that is maybe somewhat of a cause for concern, but I've probably already spent too much time on this because I do actually, before we move on to the Falcons, I do want to give some credit to Carson Steele. We talked about what's it going to look like without Isaiah Pacheco. Carson Steele was basically able to provide a very similar skill set of just ground and pound up the middle, get a handful of yards, stay ahead of the chains. 17 carries, 72 yards there. Thought it looked really encouraging, all things considered there. But yeah, and I do want to get to the Falcons side of this because the Falcons are the team where, the Chiefs can win or lose games in the regular season. It's not going to drastically change our opinions on them. The Falcons have a lot of proving to do up to this point, and it still hasn't looked great with them. Obviously, it's an incredible Kirk Cousins-driven touchdown drive that was putting together at the end of that Eagles game on Monday Night Football, but there's a good chance that, you can definitely make the argument that that should have never been even available to them anyways. Don't want to dive into that all of a sudden now, but, the Falcons, they do feel still pretty lackluster offensively, and that was the case for the majority of what we saw in the first 2 weeks of the season up until that game-winning drive, and didn't feel all that much better about them here. Now, credit Steve Spagnuolo, one of the best defensive coordinators in the NFL. The broadcast was hitting on it all night. They were trying to take away that outside zone and the run game with Bijan Robinson, and Robinson had maybe his least efficient game on high volume up to this point in his career. 16 carries for 31 yards. He did have a touchdown, but all things considered, the Falcons got very little out of that run game, and that's when it puts the pressure on Kirk Cousins, who is a fine game manager at this point. But I do think that at this point in his career, he's kind of somebody that you can't get into too many obvious passing situations, because then once opposing teams start to crank up the pressure like Steve Spagnuolo was on some of these key moments of the game, that you see Kirk Cousins still doesn't necessarily have that level of mobility. There was specifically, as I was mentioning, a blitz that ended up getting Kirk Cousins just off of his game, and they didn't even really have a chance at the play because the pressure was brought and Kirk just sort of had to throw it away immediately. That took place in the fourth quarter, and then there was a third down earlier in the game that stood out to me as well, where Kirk Cousins had what seemed like all day sort of in the pocket, but he doesn't have that quick motor, that quick twitch, and nor should he. It's very understandable that he doesn't, but to be able to escape the pocket and make things happen there, again, sitting in the pocket all day long, sort of had the scramble lane if he wanted it earlier, but hesitates, and then by the time he actually did decide to make the move, he was pretty easily tackled for a sack there as well. And it might have been Onyemata for the Falcons, who's been a little bit of a revelation there. I just wanted to give a quick shout there, I suppose. But, all things considered, I think that this is a Falcons team that, again, if you can stay ahead of schedule, that might just be enough. If you play good defense, with which I thought the Falcons did, and they have been up to this point, through 3 games. The other part of it, though, is you got to have smart coaching, and Raheem Morris is somebody that I have a lot of belief in, but I really did not like the decisions on that final drive or two to sort of try and close out this game. It was 22-17. There were a couple fourth and short situations where, I thought it was a pretty well executed couple of plays where the Falcons it was 3rd and 2 or something along those lines with just a few minutes left, that offensive coordinator Zach Robinson called 2 consecutive play calls. So they went up to the field, they ran the ball first time, didn't get anything. They immediately had that next call drawn up, and they end up hitting Drake London over the middle for the first down there. And, that's refreshing coaching. You look at this as a Falcons team with so many weapons that last year, frankly, with Arthur Smith, was so poorly coached from an offensive perspective. But again, I can give props there, and I think that I've seen a lot of good things, especially from Zach Robinson, the way that he's getting the ball in the hands of Bijan Robinson in different ways and such. But that being said, then you look at Raheem Morris after that fourth quarter, that fourth down conversion. A couple plays later, it's 4th and 5. At that point, I would have taken the points, knowing that if you get another defensive stop, a field goal wins the game for you. Now, they mentioned on the broadcast, the analytics said go for it. I just feel like we see too many coaches being too smart for themselves. I would say that about Sirianni in this game, in their game this week as well against the Saints in terms of those fourth down decisions, and then going back to the Monday Night Football game last week. But I thought that this was a situation for Morris where it's 4th and 5. Your offense really hasn't looked that great. And you can use that as an argument for, well, maybe they can't get back down the field like that again. I don't really see it that way. I feel like the Falcons, and they did get themselves back into the red zone the next drive, but they end up not getting the 4th and 5. And then once they do get the ball back pretty quickly after their defense forces a 3 and out, it leads them to need a touchdown to win the game, where, again, I don't like playing the hypothetical game. If they end up kicking that field goal instead of not getting on 4th and 5, different field position, maybe the Chiefs call the game differently. I think you take the points there, set yourself up in position to trust your defense, which is the strength of your team, and then you just need a field goal. And ultimately, I just think that Raheem Morris got in his own way a little bit, because then they do get to 4th down once again on that final drive, and I hated the play call, the run to the outside like that. I just feel like there were a number of times on Sunday that we saw coaches on these 4th and short situations bring the ball even further away from the line to gain in order to make up for it. It's just not the way that I would do it, but also, what do I know necessarily? But I thought that was a little bit of a tough moment for Raheem Morris, but let me know if you disagree in the comment section, as we do have a chat here from Shots Below the Belt. Patrick Mahomes has become a villain in the NFL, sort of like how Tom Brady was. The Chiefs used to be exciting to watch, but now all they do is just enough to win. Can any team in the league take them down? Well, I'll say that too, because you're right. Chiefs definitely a villain at this point, which is why when some of these games come down to ticky-tacky calls, listen, there was a missed defensive pass interference on the Falcons on that third down right before the 4th and 5 that they didn't get. And especially coming off of last week where against the Bengals, they did get a pass interference call that was of the same degree, if not less than what the Chiefs got away with this weekend, that everybody just likes to sort of point to collusion. And obviously, there are cases to be made that the league is better off when the Chiefs are good, but I don't like to go down that route too much. I don't think you win and lose games with the referees, but that's just my opinion. But to the question of shots below the belt here, can any team in the league take them down? I mean, all three of the teams that they've played so far have given them what feels like their best shot to some degree. I mean, it's taken 3 close games pulling them out. And my answer to that would be no off of the gates here, because I think that the Chiefs are probably the best roster in the NFL, if not, the 49ers, but they're definitely up there. You may be making a case for the Lions as well. The AFC, I mean, there are teams that are capable of doing so. I think the Ravens are capable of it. I think the Bengals are. The Bills, we're going to have to see. I'm really curious what they look like tonight now that they are going to be out without their top 2 linebackers. I think Taron Johnson, their nickelback, is also going to be out. I know he was at least questionable the last time I checked. And it is a situation where, they have a very depleted defense, but Josh Allen, as much as, yes, he makes a lot of stupid decisions, he is talented enough that, any of those teams, I think, can make things interesting with the Chiefs. The reality is, though, you also need the defense to be able to stop Mahomes when the game is on the line. Last night, the Chiefs actually got away with, actually, now that I mention it, this is 3 straight games where, even after losing L'Jarius Sneed, the Chiefs defense has been the one to close out the game, and it's been very close. There have been penalty calls or missed calls that have played a factor there, but either way, still, you can't beat the Chiefs if you don't know how to stop Patrick Mahomes. And as much as I spent the first half of this segment here talking about the shortcomings of the offense up to this point, I do feel like by the end of the year, they can click enough like they did in the playoffs last year. And that's where teams are going to win or lose games. Can you shut down Patrick Mahomes? And I don't know if I have a great answer in terms of what teams are capable of doing it. I think there's those 3 I just mentioned in the AFC, the Lions and the 49ers specifically are 2 teams that I do still think are very talented and are capable. I'd maybe throw a dark horse of the Packers in that conversation, but that's kind of what you're looking at, I feel like, at this point. I like a bunch of the other teams. The Texans, are a good team. Eagles, even though yesterday was a little bit messy, a good team. But it's the Chiefs league right now. They are the team to beat until anybody knocks them off. And we're 3 weeks into the regular season, and we still have not seen that yet. But I mentioned the Ravens as one of those other elite teams that have a chance. They were winless up until yesterday, where ultimately they were able to hold off a Dallas Cowboys comeback. That was a game in Jerry World, a big statement win there. And I want to dive into the specifics of why I was so encouraged with the Ravens game plan, especially yesterday, and why I think that it's something that can be a recipe for success moving forward for the Ravens. So we're going to be diving into that, but before we do so, we have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.